Fight!
Fighting games were huge in the 32 and 64-bit era, with the Sega Saturn being the go-to place for arcade-perfect ports of all of Capcom's 2D fighters, and the PlayStation was blazing trails with 3D fighting games like Tekken and Toshinden. The Nintendo 64, unfortunately, was kind of left out in the cold and was tossed a few meager scraps with games that weren't very good from developers who weren't really sure what to do with a fighting game. And there was a really great fighting game released for the Nintendo 64 that unfortunately never made it to North America. And that's why today we're going to talk about Rakuga Kids. Rakuga Kids was developed and published by Konami for the Nintendo 64, releasing on July 23, 1998 in Japan, and on December 4th that same year in Europe. For some reason, the game was never released in North America, which is a dang shame, because it's a far better fighting game than some of the other stuff released for the system. The story of the game takes place in Twinkletown, where a group of 6 children find a box of magic crayons in a cave, which is exactly where I'd look if I was looking for enchanted art supplies. They each take one for themselves before local bully Val steals the other 2. Val learns that anything he draws with the crayons comes to life, and uses his creation Mamezo to steal things and cause trouble around town. The other kids decide to use their crayons to create their own living art to beat Val and get the crayons back. In a genre where story isn't very important, especially in the 90s, it's a cool premise that gives narrative justification for the game's gorgeous art. All the game's fighters are 2D drawings on polygonal backgrounds, and in motion everything looks phenomenal. Due to compression and resolution issues, my captured footage isn't even close to doing the game justice. Running on a CRT television, Rakuga Kids looks amazingly sharp and fluid, and doesn't have any of the Nintendo 64's trademark blur. I honestly think it's one of the best looking games on the console. The game's title has some really cool wordplay too. In Japanese, Rakugaki means graffiti, so Rakuga Kids comes easily from that. Going a bit deeper, gaki is also a slang term meaning brat, which fits as well. I don't know, I think this kind of stuff is just pretty cool. Obviously, the game's unique look is what grabs you from the get-go, but how does it play? Rakuga Kids features a control system that'll be familiar to anyone who cut their teeth on Capcom's library of fighting games, with 3 punch buttons and 3 kick buttons. You'd think this would be awkward on the Nintendo 64's 3-pronged controller, especially since you have to use the C buttons, but I found it really easy to adapt to and never had any trouble. Since it's a fighting game, you'll be using the D-pad for control, so you'll be holding the 2 outermost handles on the controller. The game's fighters are an appropriately colorful bunch and definitely capture the design style and imagination of children's drawings. Astronauts, drawn by Andy, is the Ryu of the bunch, featuring Fireball and Dragon Punch specials, and he's the game's de facto mascot. Robot CHO, drawn by Jerry, is the slow bruiser of the cast, and he can dish out heavy damage to make up for his lack of speed. Bear Tank, drawn by Cleone, is definitely the coolest looking character on the roster. He's quick and he has lots of combo potential. Captain Cat Kit, drawn by DDJ, is a super quick and nimble fighter that attacks with musical instruments and basketballs, and definitely looks like he should be hanging out with Parappa the Rapper. Cool's Roy, drawn by Roy, is kind of the Ken to Astronaut's Ryu, featuring a lot of the same move inputs, but being a bit quicker overall. I'm actually just now wondering if the spaceman and cowboy dichotomy is a Toy Story reference. Anyway, the last main character is Marsa, drawn by Nola. She's a witch who incorporates chickens into her attacks, and she's really good at mix-ups and catching opposing fighters off guard. Of course, Val and Mamezo are playable as well, featuring a lot of the cheese you'd expect from a boss character. Crazy speed, teleports, and projectiles that hit multiple times. There are also 2 hidden boss characters, Mudgas and Inuzo, a palette swap of Mamezo, and George and Darkness, a ghost dog who shares some moves with Wolverine from Capcom's Marvel-based fighters. Inuzo and Darkness can be unlocked by playing the game for 2 and 5 hours respectively, and it doesn't save your progress onto the cartridge, so make sure that you have a memory card. The roster isn't huge, but each character plays very distinctly from one another, and knowing how to play as one won't necessarily give you the skills you need to excel as another. There were some characters like Bear Tank and Marsa that I just couldn't seem to get the hang of no matter what. As someone who's liked fighting games for years, I always greatly prefer a diverse cast over a large cast, so Rakuga Kids definitely gets high marks from me there. It's not a fighting game without super moves, and Rakuga Kids' wacky magic moves are one of the highlights of the game. When the crayon meter at the bottom of the screen fills up, you can do one of your character's 3 magic moves. Forward and R does offense magic, which does insane amounts of damage but is hard to land. Back and R does defense magic, which does little damage, but pushes your opponent far enough away from you to get your bearings back. Pressing R while blocking does counterattack magic, which does decent damage and knocks your opponent back. The stages are all pretty interesting despite being static backgrounds. They're all rendered in 3D and kind of tilt with the action, which is a neat effect, but sometimes there are foreground objects that kind of get in the way. They're all places you'd expect kids to gather, like basketball courts on schoolyards, and they all have cool names like Rocket Park, Sky Hoop, and Viva School. Despite being a fighting game, they try to keep some positive messages in there too. The game's soundtrack is really rad as well. I've seen it referred to as surfer rock, and I think that's definitely a good way to describe it. The upbeat tunes are a nice complement to the colorful art style, and it sounds so good you can easily forget that the game is on a cartridge and not a CD. Rakuga Kids really shows that style and substance don't have to be mutually exclusive. Konami could have very easily focused on the visuals of the game and just called it a day, but the entire game holds up extremely well as a serious fighting game. And I'm certainly never going to be on the EVO main stage, but I've played a lot of fighting games in my time, and I can tell when a game has something to it. I think if Rakuga Kids were to have come out in North America, it definitely would have gained a dedicated following. And even though the game wasn't a huge hit, Beartank managed to make his way into a few other Konami games. He's playable in Castlevania Circle of the Moon if you equip certain rare items, and he's also an unlockable racer in Konami Crazy Racers for the Game Boy Advance. A few songs from the game even showed up in Konami's Bimani series too. I only have the Japanese cartridge, but I'd love to get the box and manual someday to go with it. One of my favorite Tumblr blogs, the Video Game Art Archive, posted some manual scans a while back, and they're just as charming as the game itself. I'd been interested in Rakuga Kids for a really long time, and had friend of the show Jimmy Hoppa keep an eye out for a copy in Japan. As soon as it arrived, I absolutely fell in love. I was just hoping for a neat novelty, but it was all that and more. The best thing about it too is that it's a simple game for people who aren't super adept at fighting games to just pick up and play. I really like playing fighting games with my wife, but since there's a huge difference in our experience, there aren't many games we get to play on an equal level. But with Rakuga Kids, we were able to have a good time playing together. I'm not sure about the European version of the game, but because of the PAL and NTSC difference, I'd imagine it runs slower. The Japanese version actually has all the menus and important stuff in English, so it's easy to play even if you don't speak the language. If you need to know how to play Japanese games on your Nintendo 64, check out this video I made showing you how to do so without even having to modify your system. Man, there's just so much to love about Rakuga Kids, and every time I think about it, I smile. It's got personality for days, and I just love little things like how Roy designed a character named Cools Roy, or that he and DDJ put unnecessary punctuation in their characters' names. Even the game's menus are charming with their weird chicken motif. I've been really excited to tell you guys about this game because I really like finding quirky games like this that are under the radar for whatever reason and helping them get the love they deserve. And Rakuga Kids just has it all. It's got great music, great graphics, a great cast, and it plays great. I'm saying great a lot because it's a great game, and I really wish that it had come out here and really got the love and attention it deserved. But thanks to the internet, it's never too late for these games to find their audience. So that's all I got for today, so until next time, remember, love games, love yourselves, and love each other. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and checking out the other 2 video recommendations here. If you'd like to support my channel, a $1 a month pledge on Patreon will get you early access to all my future videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, I'm on Twitter and Facebook as SpaceKappa.